पृथिवी शान्तिरन्तरिक्षगं शान्तिर्द्यौ शान्तिर्दिशः शान्तिरवान्तरः दिशा शान्तिरग्निः शान्तिर्वायुः शान्तिरादित्यः शान्तिश्चन्द्रमा शान्तिर्नक्षत्राणि शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिर्वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्गौ शान्तिरजा शान्तिरश्वः शान्तिः पुरुषः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिर्ब्राह्मणः शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः शान्तिर्मे अस्तु शान्तिः. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha. Sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet. Sarvastaratu durgani sarvo bhadrani pashyatu. Sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Takshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Welcome everyone. We resume our study of the Gita after this a month-long recess. Last Sunday we celebrated Swami Vivekananda's birthday, and we shall resume this week with a look at some of the key verses in chapter 9 of the Gita. We had begun this looking into this chapter in November or December. We saw some of the important ideas and concepts that occur in this chapter. We saw about Yoga Kshema, we saw about the Daivi and Asuri, the divine and the demonic aspects that are present both within and without. One of the things devotees are often asked to do is to establish a definitive relationship with God. The reason we need to have some kind of a relationship with God is only when we are related in some way, then we become closer to the person. We get to know the person well. Now, this relationship cannot be artificially generated. It's not something that we reason it out or think about. It's something that happens naturally. And oftentimes, especially in devotional circles, there are 5 classical modes in which the relationship between God and the devotee is described. One is what is called the Shanta Bhava. It's kind of a calm, serene form of relationship in which one has a sense of connectedness, but it's not defined in any specific way. The next is called Dasya Bhava, relating ourselves with God as a servant to a master, that God, the Lord, is our master and we are God's servants. And if the Shanta Bhava, the first one that I described, the example that is often given is of the Vedic rishis. They had this sense of connectedness with the divine. The second one, of relating to God as a servant to a master, that is exemplified in the character of Hanuman, for instance, in the Ramayana. Hanuman is seen as that eternal servant of the Lord. So that's one model, that's one ideal that may come naturally to some people. A third is called the Sakhya Bhava, looking upon God as a close friend. And the classical example given is that of Arjuna's relationship with Krishna. The next is called Vatsalya Bhava, the relationship of a parent, especially a mother, to her child. And God is in this case seen as a little baby. So worshipping the baby Krishna, or the baby Rama, or the baby Ramakrishna, or baby Buddha, baby Jesus. In the school in which I studied when I was in high school, it was at a school run by Jesuits, and the church we had inside the school campus. It was called the Church of the Infant Jesus. So on the altar was a beautiful baby Jesus. So this way of adoring the divine as a baby is present across religious traditions. And so having that maternal or paternal aspect toward the divine is one way of relating to the divine. And conversely, sometimes it's also called Santanabhav, looking upon oneself as a child and God as the parent, God as the father, or God as the mother, which is probably more common. And the final one in this classical model is that called the Madhura Bhava, God as the beloved, God who is the closest to us, the most intimate form of relationship with God. So these are 5 modes of connecting with God. But clearly, these are not the only way God can be seen. That these are just 5 kind of representative ways. But the way to relate with God can occur in many, many, many different forms. And that is what is described in verses 17 and 18 of chapter 9. So please take a look at the book, your own copy of the Gita. I will read these verses first. Pitahamasya jagato mata dhata pitamaha vedyam pavitramonkara ruksamayajureva gatirbharta prabhus sakshi nivasa sharanam surit prabhava pralayasthanam nidhanam bijamavyayam. I am the father of the world, the mother, the sustainer, the grandfather, the purifier, the one thing to be known, the syllable Om, and also the Rik, Saman, and Yajus. The goal, the supporter, the Lord, the witness, the abode, the refuge, the friend, the origin, the dissolution, the substratum, the storehouse, the seed immutable. You can see that really there's many different ways we can look upon God. And the way we see God and the way we see ourselves and how the divine and me are connected. Once Sri Ramakrishna told his disciples, he said, all that you need to know is who I am and who you are and how we are related. And he was referring to this idea that the primary function in spiritual life is to find out who I am, to have an idea about who or what that ultimate reality, the Supreme Being is, and how the two are related. Now, none of these have to be carved in stone. None of these are definitive. You need not have a definitive answer to any of these. But we must start somewhere. So what is my present understanding of who I am? What is my present understanding of who the Supreme Being is? And what is my present understanding of how we two are related? And while we hold on to this present understanding of ours, we can also be open to the possibility that as I evolve, as I grow, my understanding of myself, my understanding of who God is, and my understanding of the relationship of me connecting with God, all of these can evolve, all of this can change, all of these will improve. As my clarity improves, I'll begin to see things more clearly. And when I begin to see things more clearly, I will notice things I may not have seen before. And so while keeping the possibility of continuing to learn, we start with recognizing our present relationship with the divine. And so these 2 verses, 17 and 18, give us an idea about how we can look upon God. Now, as I said before, none of these things can be reasoned out. It just happens naturally, and that's great. Once we have some idea about how and where we are located in this whole play or drama of existence, then the next question would be, what do I do? Although sometimes we may think about our life in a very rational way, as we live our life, almost all of us, there are other forces in our lives which make us do the things that we do, which make us want the things that we want. It's not simply guided by logic or reasoning, although that's what some of us might like to think. But clearly, there is the force of our samskaras, the past impressions embedded on the mind, our own desires, our own ambitions, our own hopes for the future. All of these forces from different directions impel us to do certain things, to think in a certain way. And if there is a common factor, we might say that all living beings want to be happy. All living beings want to not be unhappy. So we want to keep away from suffering and we want to experience happiness. Although not all of us may express it in exactly the same way or with the same words, we might notice that all of the choices that we make in life, all of the decisions that we take in life, are somewhere consciously or unconsciously, we are expecting that this way of thinking, this way of doing will something that will make me happy, it will set me free. And even the things that we generally dismiss as something bad or evil, even those activities are impelled, are forced by the desire to be happy. Even when a thief goes and when steals something, now we might say, well, that's bad, that's wrong, that's immoral. True, but there is a need, there is something that the thief is lacking, and the thief feels that if by stealing this thing, that need or that lack, I will be fulfilled in some way. So, just as good things are done in order to be happy, even terrible things are done. Now, clearly, if certain mind feels that it can be happy by torturing other people or bringing suffering upon other people, then there is something distorted about that mind. And then clearly it needs to be treated. There's something has to be done. But the force that makes people do good or bad things, it is because they want to be happy. So this experience of happiness, of where we'll be happy, how we will be happy, often in religious language, we hear about heavens. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that simply happiness can be got only in heaven. We can be happy even here. If I enjoy eating chocolate ice cream, and if I eat that ice cream, the happiness from that will not come to me after death in some heaven. I get the happiness right away. So there are a lot of things that bring us happiness immediately. But there may be some things where I do something good, do something which I feel deserves a reward, and I may not see any visible manifestation of that reward in this life. And in such cases, religions of the world often say that there is such a thing as Swarga, there is such a thing as some higher world, a celestial world, in general called a heaven. So, every good act will be rewarded in some way, and that reward often comes in different forms, but ultimately all those forms means I'm going to be happy in some form. So I'll go to heaven. Conversely, if I do something bad, um, I need to be reprimanded. I need to be punished for it. And the punishment also can come in many different forms, but ultimately it's going to make me suffer and feel sorry. So a place, a symbol of that, the place symbolically is called hell, where it's just pain and torture and suffering, and the other place is called heaven. Now, whether these are actually places or not, no one knows. Some people are adamant about saying there is no such thing as heaven or hell. And there are some people who are adamant about saying there is such a place about heaven or hell. And everyone is free to think about it in a way that comes naturally to them. One possible way to think about it is by saying, well, if this place exists, if this place called the earth exists, then who am I to say that no other place can exist? So to leave the possibility open that it could be there or it could not be there, and it really doesn't matter so much as much as the principle that a good act will be rewarded in some way, a bad act will be punished in some way. And that's essentially what karma theory is all about. Where there is also difference of opinion is how much reward will a good act get and how much suffering will a bad act be given. Now, one view is that this is the life we have, and if you do something good, follow a certain precepts, do what is right, then you will be eternally in bliss afterwards. Or contrary, if I mess it up, if I do something terrible, then I am going to eternally be roasted or eternally be put into some boiling oil in hell. If you read some of the descriptions of hell in different books, they're pretty terrifying. There is, I think, Hindus have a Purana, a book called the Garuda Purana, which describes terrible hells in there one. And then, of course, we know in every religious tradition there are certain descriptions about how hells are, and they are not pretty places. So some people believe, karma theory certainly states, that since the actions that result in going to heaven or hell, if those actions are finite and limited, then the results also would be finite and limited. It doesn't make at least logical sense that the actions are finite, but the result is infinite. I do something good and I'm eternally happy. I do something bad and I'm eternally suffering. So the karma theory says, no, that doesn't make so much sense. And so they say that as much good that I have done, that much happiness I will get. As much bad I have done, that much suffering. And so there is this parity between the cause and the effect. And so after, let's say a person does something good, goes to heaven and enjoys, has some great happiness there, but after the effect of that cause is over, that person has to come back. And that's described in verse number 21. Let's read that verse. Te tam bhuktva swargalokam vishalam kshine punye martyalokam vishanti evam trayi dharmam anuprapanna gata gatam kama kama labhante. Having enjoyed the vast Swarga world, they enter the mortal world on the exhaustion of their merits. Thus, abiding by the injunction of the Vedas, desiring desires, they constantly come and go. So, this is the choice that we have, that we continuously are doing work, and no matter how long we live, it's still a limited quantity, and therefore we keep on doing good work or bad work. And again, all of these are limited entities. And so depending on the nature of the good or bad that we have done, we will then be rewarded with another limited stay in heaven or hell. Then we come back again, we do more work, we go. So we kind of keep on going round and round. And that's why this is often called the circle of relative existence, samsara chakra. So that is one option. Is there something else that I can do? And what the Gita stresses, we saw it already in second chapter, and the idea then will keep on recurring throughout the book, is since we do not have the choice not to work, we are constantly working. Now, work, again, we use the word work in many different ways. Sometimes when you meet a person and say, what do you do? We're generally referring to like, what do you do to earn your livelihood? Or what's the work that you do? But the word work or karma, as it is used, really means any kind of an activity. So even the things that are happening within my body, the circulation of the blood, that's motion, that's activity. I pick up this book, that's work, that's activity. Thinking, that's mental activity. Now, all of these things are karma. Now, in karma yoga, the karma theory, what's often called karma vada, they especially focus on the activities that we do consciously, intentionally. So, while the blood being circulated within our body is karma, we are really not, no one is like asking my permission, like, should I go and circulate all through the body? No one is really asking me, it's just happening on its own. And so it doesn't get much focus in karma theory because there is no sense of agency behind these involuntary activities. But voluntary activity, something that I choose to do, something that happens with my knowledge, something that I can stop doing if I want to, that is where the sense of agency comes in. So what the Gita suggests is that while I cannot stop the activity altogether, what I do have choice is two things. First, I consciously choose to do what is right or choose to do what is good. I have a choice there. If there's something I find that is bad or wrong, I can say no to it. If there's something that is right. Now, when something is a very pleasant, joyful activity, and it is right as well, that's easy to do. But sometimes there will be occasions in life that what is right and what is good may not be such a interesting or even pleasant work. It could be something that we rather not do, and yet it must be done. So, can I do something good and right even if it immediately doesn't seem all that attractive? Similarly, can I desist from doing what is wrong or bad even if it seems welcoming, even if it is attractive? So that's the first thing. I can consciously try to do what is right and good. Now, if I do that thing that is right and good, keeping in mind the rewards that it will give me, either immediately or in some future celestial world or heaven, I will get it. Of course I'll get it. That's what karma theory says. But if I do something good and say, I don't want the reward, I don't want the result. I'm doing this good thing because it is good to do good. I don't want anything. Now, it's not just about saying it. It's actually truly feeling that way inside. That I don't want to go to heaven. I don't want anything. I just know this is the right thing to do. And if I can do it that way, then it'll purify my heart. And if it purifies my heart, it'll give me the clarity of vision. And the clearer I begin to see things, the better I will know who I am, the better I will know who God is, and the better I will know how I and God are related. So my understanding of who I am, who God is, and how we are related will begin to improve, will begin to become clearer. The more I'm able to work, more I'm able to carry out my duties and responsibilities in life without any self-interest involved. So that is what I can do. If I do that, then the result is not going to heaven, but the result is purification of the heart. And if my heart keeps on getting more and more pure, the mind keeps on getting more and more clear, then a time will come, the veil that is separating me from that reality, that veil will disappear. Everything will become clear, and then I become free forever. That's the choice. That's where spiritual life and worldly life can be distinguished. Both worldly people also can do, and often do good things. A spiritual person also does good thing. But what's different is a worldly person who does good thing may do it with expectation of not necessarily always going to heaven, but at the very least, recognition from the world around. That the work that I do is appreciated by my peers, by the people around me. Though sometimes people who really do good things and find that they have not received the appreciation they were looking for, can often get frustrated, can often get angry, can often stop doing good things. Or even if they don't stop doing good things, they can sometimes experience a kind of bitterness in their heart. We are familiar with Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, a great educationist and a very generous philanthropist in 19th century Bengal. In the Gospel of Ramakrishna, we read the story about him meeting with Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna goes to his place to see him because he had heard such wonderful things about Vidyasagar. And he was truly a wonderful person. Sri Ramakrishna said about him that that there is gold in his heart, but he doesn't know it yet. So there was a veil that somehow covered his understanding of who he was. And so a story is told. He did so much amount of good in his life, but towards the end of his life, a kind of a bitterness had come into him, because a lot of the people that he helped turned against him. They stabbed him in the back, or they said terrible things about him. They hurt him. And that experience was shattering. It seems that whenever any person criticized him towards the end of his life, Vidyasagar used to say, "Why is this person hurting me this way? I don't ever remember to have helped him." So that was the kind of a bitterness, that the very people I helped. So that doesn't take away his goodness, that doesn't take away the wonderful things that he did. But it does show that the expectation of recognition can prevent us from evolving spiritually. And so if we can live without expectations of any kind and yet continue to do what is good, then that will purify our heart. And one way of doing that, one way, as I said already, is that I should do something right because it is right, do something good because it is good. There's another way to do the same thing, and that is when we have a devotional temperament, when we have that sense of connection with God, when we have developed a certain kind of relationship with God, if I think of myself, say, as a child of God, then everything that I do in my life, if I say I'm doing it out of love for my Divine Father, for my Divine Mother. But someone devoted to the Buddha can say, I do this out of love for Buddha. Someone devoted to Ramakrishna or Holy Mother could say, all of this work that I do it as an offering to Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. Because everything that is good, I see as it's a duty, it's a responsibility they have entrusted to me, and whatever I do it out of love for them. Now, if I do that, then it brings me that same purity of heart. So these are the two ways Karma Yoga gets practiced. One is for people who may not have that kind of a connection with a personal deity. And therefore, Swami Vivekananda used this wonderful phrase, he called it work for work's sake. Do good because it is good to do good. Do what is right because it is good, right to do what is right. No other desire, no other expectations, just keep on doing what's right. That is work for work's sake. A second way to do practice Karma Yoga is to, in Sanskrit they call it Ishvara Arpana Buddhya. Do it as an offering to Ishvara, an offering to God, out of love for God. Both of these ways are equally effective in producing that purity of heart. And that Krishna describes. Look at verse 26 and 27. Because sometimes when we think about offering, we may think, I do not know how to make an offering. In fact, all of the puja that is done, with the puja that we do at the Vedanta Center, on the pujas that are done anywhere, are forms of offering. You will have seen what the worshipper does is offer flowers, and sandal paste, chandan, or incense, and fruits, and food. So, offerings. And one might think, either I do not know how to make those offerings, or I do not have all these elaborate things to offer. And to such people, Krishna gives these two amazing verses. Let me read verse number 26. Patram pushpam phalam toyam yo me bhaktya prayachati tadaham bhaktyouparatam ashnami prayatatmanaha. Whoever with devotion offers me a leaf, a flower, a fruit, or water, that I accept, the devout gift of the pure-minded. There is a saying, Bhavagrahi Janardana. Bhavagrahi means God looks at the heart of the devotee. Bhava. That when we are doing worship, God doesn't see, oh, this person is giving me all these very expensive flowers or expensive things or very grand things, and I'm going to bless this person more than someone who is just bringing me one little flower. And what Krishna is showing in this verse is, whatever you give, even if you just one flower, even a blade of grass, even one little fruit, or if you don't have anything, just even a spoonful of water. But if I offer it with devotion, with faith, that Krishna will accept, that God will accept. And to such people, he says, I accept that gift so long as it is offered with a pure heart. So we don't need to know a lot of rituals. We don't need to be experts in puja in order to make an offering. And just as a simple offering with a flower or water can be done, exactly in the same way, we offer our activities. Everything that I do, not simply some big things that I do, every little thing that I can do can be offered. Many of you may have read that little book. It's an amazing book. If you have not read it, I strongly recommend that you read it. It's called The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence. Amazing book. it's very inspiring to read. It looks very simple, but then the moment we try to practice it, we recognize that it really calls for patience, perseverance to be able to make an offering of every little thing that we do in life. And that Krishna describes in verse number 27. Yat karoshi yadashnasi yajjuhoshi dadasi yat tapasyasi kaunteya tat kurushva madarpanam. Whatever thou doest, whatever thou eatest, whatever thou offerest in sacrifice, whatever thou givest away, whatever austerity thou practicest, O son of Kunti, do that as an offering unto me. So it's not just about the puja that we do in the shrine, but everything that you do, whatever you eat, that's why we say prayer before meals, whatever you offer in sacrifice, whatever you give away, whatever austerity you practice, so even the japa that you do every day, even the meditation that you practice every day, offer the fruits of that. Sometimes we might say, well, I want to meditate in order for me to be liberated. And that's fine. But one can also think this way. Moksha or liberation is a big, big prize. And this little bit of japa that I'm doing for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, is that a fair price in order to be liberated? Am I paying enough price for that? Once Holy Mother said, these Vedic rishis, they practiced austerities and meditation for centuries. And here we do our meditation for a few minutes and we expect liberation. So liberation is not, moksha is not some form of compensation that is given in return for the meditation that we do. So even to think that I'm meditating so that I should become liberated, that cause and effect relationship doesn't work. What is more powerful, that even at the end of meditation to say, even this japa that I have practiced, the meditation that I have done out of love for my Ishta, out of love for God. And whatever results this has, I offer it. Yes, it's inadequate. I know it's not enough, but this is all I have. And that's why Krishna in the earlier verse said, you may not have lots of flowers. Even a small leaf, even a little flower, even a spoonful of water, that's fine if it is given with a pure heart, if it's given with devotion, if it is given with faith. So my own little japa, my own little meditation, fully aware that it's nowhere near enough for me to give what I want, but this is all I can give at the moment. And I give now with faith, with humility, with sincerity. And that is what Krishna is revealing. Tat kurushva madarpanam. Make that as an offering to the divine. And when that is done, the next verse says, Shubha shubha phalairevam mokshase karma bandhanaihi sannyasa yoga yuktatma vimukto mamupaishyasi. Thus shalt thou be freed from the bondage of actions, bearing good and evil results, with a heart steadfast in the yoga of renunciation, and liberated thou shalt come unto me. So, the moksha that we will get, the God realization that will come to us, is not the result of our spiritual practice. Spiritual practice is not the cost that we pay in order to become liberated. I think we must just banish the idea. Whatever we are doing in spiritual life is our own little offering at the feet of God. And whatever we gain in spiritual life, that self-realization, God realization will come not as a result of our practice, it will come out of grace. There is a principle in the Vedas which says, Yat kritakam tad anityam. That means whatever is a result of a certain activity, it is temporary. All results are temporary. Because the cause is limited, the effect will also be limited. So when I realize God, when I attain moksha, that will not be the result of anything. Because if it is the result of anything, then it's not going to be permanent. It's not going to be eternal. So that is one thing, very important thing to be kept in mind. And finally, please take a look at the last verse of this chapter, verse number 34. Manmana bhava mat bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaishyasi yuktvaivam atmanam matparayanaha. Fill thy mind with me, be my devotee, sacrifice unto me, bow down to me, thus having made thy heart steadfast in me, taking me as the supreme goal, thou shalt come to me. So that is the ultimate goal. With every little thing that I do as a part of my spiritual practice, whether it is japa or meditation, whether it is my daily spiritual reading, whether it is this little acts of service that I try to do in the spirit of karma yoga, everything that in my life I try to do as an offering to the divine, all of these things, if I do it, it will please the Lord. That's what he means by saying, fill thy mind with me. So these are ways of keeping my mind upon God. There is a saying, Yena kena prakarena manav krishnam niveshayet. Whatever ways I can find in my life to keep my mind engaged with the divine, I should find those ways. So there is a lot of scope for creative imagination, for being creative in our spiritual life. If I have that creativity within me, every little thing that I do, I will find a way to directly or indirectly connect it with the divine. And that's the only way to keep my mind immersed in the divine, connected with the divine in some way. Because a mind that is somehow connected with the divine, or there is God somewhere in the corner of the heart, somewhere in the scheme of things, it will be very difficult. It will be impossible to do what should not be done, to do what is not good. We will see all of the blunders and mistakes that we do in life. For a devotee, that those are the only times the devotee forgets God. It's impossible to keep God in mind and do something so unspiritual that we later have to regret it. So all of the things occur only with forgetfulness. In the war, the Kurukshetra war, which is the backdrop for the Gita, there are several instances we find about when self-forgetfulness leads to some terrible blunder, even death. We see, in fact, one of the climactic positions in the war, where the battle between Arjuna and Karna. There's a lot been written about it. There are plays and there are songs, and it's one of the very epic scenes in the war. So both were great warriors. According to one view, Karna was probably even better or superior to Arjuna. He had all the responses, appropriate, whatever arrows or missiles which Arjuna could have sent to kill Karna, Karna could have responded them equally well. But then there is the scene where one of the wheels of his chariot sinks and he's trying to get it out. And at that moment, he forgets. There is a moment of forgetfulness. He just mind blanks out. So when Arjuna sends that arrow, although Karna knows how to respond to it, but there is a momentary forgetfulness. He just blanks out and says, I don't know what to do. That's when that arrow comes and kills him. We will see. If we look back at all the stupid things we have done in our lives, we will see that all of them occurred during moments of this kind of forgetfulness. Because when we are thinking about the divine, when we are conscious about our spiritual responsibilities, we seldom do anything that is wrong. And so the challenge in life is to somehow minimize these moments of forgetfulness and find ways to continuously remain in touch with the divine. And that is what he described in the last verse. Fill thy mind with me, be my devotee, and so on. So everything, body, mind, everything should somehow remain connected with the divine. There is this one quote of Swami Vivekananda, which is, I really love it very much. Swamiji says, hold on to an ideal. I think he says, have an ideal, and that one ideal alone, let it be so strong, so great, that there may be nothing else left in the mind. No place for anything else, no time for anything else. Now we know that that's a high ideal in itself, and it may take time for us to reach there. But can I consciously try to see that I remain alert, I remain vigilant, at least in my waking hours? We don't, right now, most of us don't have any control over what happens when we are asleep. What kind of dreams will come? We cannot control our dreams, but we can control what I will do, how I will think during my waking hours. So if I learn to be alert and vigilant in my waking hours, then it will be possible to extend that alertness, that vigilance, even in my sleep. Yogis are able to control even their dreams. So, but let's begin. Let's begin with the time when we are awake. Because right now, even in this awakened state, even in this waking world, a lot of our life has become mechanical. A lot of our life is just goes by habit. We are not doing everything mindfully with awareness. So the moment we try to increase that awareness throughout the waking period, gradually we'll be able to extend it even in sleep. So there are lots, as I said, we've just taken a few representative verses from chapter 9 to focus on some of the key ideas that come in this second half of this chapter. So we will stop here today. If you have any comments, questions, please feel free to share. And then we'll have a 5-minute break. And then afterwards, we will take a look at your comments and questions. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. Let's take a look at the questions. You spoke about offering everything that we do to God to purify our heart. What is the place for strongly demanding liberation from God, since God is my own and closest to me? We see Ramakrishna himself weeping and crying for Mother. Yes, of course, we can do that. God is our very own. And just as when we were little babies, we felt no hesitation in asking from our parents whatever we wanted, we can do that. In order for us to be able to demand things from God, we need to have first developed that kind of a closeness. Once we begin to see God is my own, then of course we can demand, we can do whatever we want. Yes, absolutely, we can do that. Next. What was the one ideal that Swami Vivekananda held closest to himself? I don't know. The most that we can do is just guess from his writings and his lectures and his words. But what he held closest to himself, only Swami Vivekananda will know about it. In fact, towards the end of his life, Swamiji once said, only another Vivekananda will understand what this Vivekananda has done. So we can only guess. Next, if the results of any action are impermanent, does that mean God realization, which is permanent, is not achievable by effort? Yes. So God realization is not the result of our efforts. And from a understanding that comes to us from the Upanishads, that just seems so obvious in some ways, because what is God realization? From the Vedantic perspective, it is to know that I am Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi. Now, Aham Brahmasmi is not the result of anything, because I never stopped being Brahman. So even now, in my state of ignorance, I'm still the infinite. We could say that I'm already realized God, I just don't know it. And so knowing it, so what we could say is ignorance, which is finite, that is the thing that can be removed through effort. But knowledge that of who I am, that is eternal. And therefore it is not temporary. That's the idea. In fact, even the story about the bird sitting on the mast of a ship, many of us who have read Ramakrishna's conversations are aware of that story, of how a bird sat on the mast of a ship, the ship set sail, and then the bird was asleep. When it opens its eyes and sees there's water everywhere, it wants to go back to its home, and so it flies in one direction, but find no land anywhere. And there's only a certain distance it can fly without stopping. Its wings get tired, so it comes back and sits on the mast again, and then says, let me try in a different direction. Then goes, first it went to east, then west, then north and south, but it's right in the middle of the ocean. And so the bird doesn't find anyone. Finally it says, there's nowhere I can go, so let me just sit here on this mast of the ship. And then eventually the ship reaches a port, and then the land is reached, and the bird is able to go. So the bird could as well have just sat on the mast and waited for the ship to return to the port. But there was energy, there was strength, there was an ability that I must go and find out for myself. And the bird tried flying everywhere. But later on, he just couldn't do it because his wings were tired, and just gave up the effort and then just sat there. So sometimes the spiritual practices that you and I do are compared to this tiring of the wings. Right now we feel, even as spiritual seekers, we feel, "Oh, I need to do this, I need to realize God, I need to practice this, I need to meditate, I need to go on to spiritual practice, I need to study scriptures, because there is still a lot of energy in the wings, and I feel I should do this, I should do that." Now, having tried all this to our utmost, a time will come when the wings are completely tired. And that's the time then we'll go and sit in the Master and says, "Lord, Sharanagata, Sharanagata, I surrender to you. There's nothing I can do on my own." That is the time the ego is completely smashed. That is the time the sense of agency completely goes away. That's the time true surrender occurs. And that's the time God's grace descends, we know. So, yes, we can say therefore that God realization is not the result of effort, but also, unless we have done our utmost effort and completely exhausted all the options, until then that complete and full surrender doesn't come. So we really need to tire our wings very quickly. That's the idea. How can one discover what form their individual relationship with God takes? Friend, parent, child, servant? Is it helpful to think of God as a friend and parent and child and someone we serve? Or is it better to have a special defined relationship? No, then nothing has to be defined very clearly. It's possible that sometimes in the course of a day, or from day to day, or from month to month, there may be times our mind might naturally think of God as a parent, as a father or mother. There may be times when we might think of God as a friend. There might be times when we think of ourselves as a servant and God as a master. It can keep on changing. And that's fine, that's okay. Or it could be a combination of any of these. That's also fine. In fact, many relationships are in fact combinations. For instance, oftentimes we see a mother, a parent, especially mother, will see that, well, a mother is a mother, but then at some stages in life, mother is simultaneously also a friend, and so on. So the idea of God as mother and God as friend can go together. At different stages in life, relationships take on added meaning, added nuances. So do not feel that you need to be kind of boxed into, categorized into only one of these relationships. It can be many, it can be a combination. The most important thing is it must happen naturally. It's not something that can be artificially superimposed upon us. We can't begin the day and saying, "Today I'm going to think of God as my child." It doesn't work that way. It's something that should come spontaneously from within. That's the idea. Can I worship myself as Satchidananda because that is my real identity? If I constantly think of myself that I am the Supreme, will I be the Supreme? Absolutely. In fact, there is a saying which says, "Devo bhutva devam yajeta." So yes, the more I think of myself as divine, only then do I become fit to connect with the source of all divinity, with the divine. And so the path of Jnana Yoga often takes this shape of affirming the true reality within, even when I am not yet experiencing it, but I keep on affirming it until all the contrary experiences are removed, and that true experience then manifests in my heart. Is grace dependent on a coordination of perfect time, place, and circumstance? Is this yoga or yoking? Can yoga practice help create the conditions for increased grace potential? Grace is often described in books as unconditional, and therefore, from the perspective of God, grace is completely unconditional. Grace, God, it doesn't seem, well, God only knows how and when God sends the grace. But if we look at the example that Ramakrishna gives, that he compares God's grace to a breeze or wind. And wind, he says, the breeze or the wind is constantly blowing. So God's grace is always available. So the question is not about the availability of grace. The question is about my ability to catch it, my ability to hold it. And that's why Ramakrishna says, if I set the sails of my boat and catch that breeze, catch that wind, then my boat will start moving. Otherwise, the wind may be there, but I haven't hoisted my sails, and so the boat cannot move. So similarly, grace is always available, but I need to make myself ready to receive that grace. So God is not demanding any condition, but I need to prepare my equipment well in order to receive that grace. In fact, there is a book called Bhagavad Gita, and it begins in the very first verse. It begins by saying, Ishwar anugraha deva pumsam Advaita vasana. Normally when we think about God and grace, we often imagine, oh, this is a very dualistic way of looking at it. But this book says that even the desire for non-duality, even the desire for Advaita comes through God's grace. Now, logically this might create problems, but that's what the idea is, that even to seek the transcendent reality, God's grace does come. It's very mysterious. It cannot be always logically explained or defined, but that has been the experience of enlightened beings all the time. Can yoga practice help to create the conditions? Yes, it just depends on what is really intended by the phrase yoga practice. Because the word yoga itself means many things to many people. And so yoga practice would also mean different things to different people. But going to the root meaning, that any practice, yoga, to join, to connect, to yoke. So any practice that connects me with the divine in one form or another, in one way or another, that certainly would create the right condition for me to be able to catch and hold that grace. Next question. Moments of forgetfulness can be due to a preoccupied mind. So how can we stay alert with mindfulness of divine all the time, especially during waking time? The question here is, what is the mind preoccupied with? And so if the mind is preoccupied with things that there is no time or scope to think about the divine, then we must accept the possibility that during that time we might make a mistake. Not necessarily mistake in a sense clearly. If your mind is preoccupied with driving, then you may not make any mistake in driving, obviously. But what are we going to do in those times when our entire concentration is needed? And there are lots of activities. Clearly, driving time, you don't want to be having a part of your mind thinking of something else. And there are some scientific experiments. There are a lot of other activities which need full concentration. And we might say, how can I be thinking of God at that same time? True. What is needed is a training of the mind. So if my mind is trained in such a way that even if for a moment it gets disconnected from the source, its past training, its discipline will keep it on track. And I think that's really what needs to be done. So if my mind is trained and disciplined, then even if that mind for a moment is concentrating on some other activity, that mind will not take a wrong step because of the past training. It's like just like we have a muscle memory in the body, there is a kind of a figurative muscle memory of the mind. So if the mind is trained to do what is right and what is good, then that muscle memory will keep the mind on the right path, even for those few moments or minutes when one may not be consciously thinking about God. Next, being selfish all through my life, how can I offer to God with a pure heart, a devoted heart? How to overcome this inherent, deeply rooted nature? If I am aware that I have been selfish all through my life, and if I truly regret what has happened in my life up to this point, then that feeling of surrender, that feeling of seeking God's help will help me. God's grace will come if I truly surrender myself to God and say, here is my life. I wish it had been different. I wish it had been better. I have made many mistakes. And you are my only hope. But it's not just the words that we use. All of this idea, all of this feeling must come from the deepest core of my being. If it comes from my heart, and I pray and I feel repentant for the way I have spent my life up to this point, then through God's grace, nothing is impossible. In a moment, all of my past weaknesses can be removed. But for that, my ego has to completely go. It may be possible to fool other people in the world. There's one person we can never fool, and that is God. And so we really have to be earnest, sincere to the backbone, as they say. Next question. Was that acceptance of the bird that she couldn't go any farther the grace we all need? Is that realization of the futility of efforts the final grace? Yes, you could say that. But a realization of the futility of effort will come only when I have really given my best. I mean, it's possible for some people to say, well, ultimately, if I have to give up all effort anyway, why make effort in the first place? Let's just recognize in the beginning itself that I can't do anything and then ask God to do it. It usually doesn't work. I think because that total conviction, not just intellectual, but that whole being to recognize that I'm completely helpless. I cannot do anything on my own. For that feeling to come, I truly need to have exhausted all the options available to me. And so we do need to tire our wings to such an extent that only then we can go and sit on the mast of the ship. And the ship is this divine ship. So that's where we need to be rooted. But our ego, our hope, our ambitions, our samskaras will make us run here and there and make us getting preoccupied with other things is a way when the bird leaves the mast of the ship. But blessed is that bird who now says, I have nowhere to go, I have no energy, no strength, this is my place. And that's what this kind of stage that we are looking for. Can we say that spiritual practice is a necessary but not sufficient condition to experience God's grace? We could say that, but as I said, God's grace is always described as unconditional. So if there is any condition, it is from our side. Our need, our hope, our expectation that we do spiritual practice. From God's side, there are no conditions. So that brings us to the end of the questions for today. So thank you for all these questions. Really very good, very pointed, very lively questions. So we will continue the study of the Gita next Sunday. We'll conclude now with the prayer. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.